Do it tomorrow and you see it frozen, you know that it's got something to do with that perhaps. There we go. One announcement that I've been asked to make. There's a talk, the 3 medieval towns of Bridlin. It's 2:30 Saturday at the Community Hall, Cwm Road in Dizerth. Fiona Gale is the speaker. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir.
Terrific. Right. So there we go. At our last meeting we were discussing various things, and we were trying to we're going to try and put together some memories of Rutland, and I'm sure that a lot of you here have got memories of Rutland. I haven't, because I haven't been here long enough, but there we go. One of the things that came up was the doctor's surgery, which used to be by the New Inn apparently. Stephen's got all the names of the doctors, but anyway, we just thought it was a place to start because it was suggested. So if you've got any memories of that surgery, any stories, if you could jot them down on a piece of paper, email them, or just give them to somebody, then you know we can include that on the website and things like that. Right. So that you haven't got to stand for too long if you are standing. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Alan Jones, Gresford Colliery disaster. Alan tells me that he's been involved with the colliery since the early 60s and 70s when he was a very young ventilation officer. He is also chair of the Friends of Gresford Colliery Disaster Memorial, as well as the North Wales Miners Association Trust. I could go on and tell you more, but if I do, it would be pointless Alan being here. So I will just leave it to Alan to tell us all about the Gresford Colliery disaster. Alan, you're very welcome.
Richard, the doors.
I should have told you that the emergency exit is over there, and just where you came in, there is a toilet. So you know, if you're sat at the back and you need the toilet, you're in trouble. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you.
If you can get in, I can get out. Ah, there's my cushion. All right, leave it for somebody else. I'll go and sit out. Oh, hold on, there we go. Anybody want a chair? There's one in there now.
At least you can see something. As was just said, I am the chair of both North Wales Miners Association Trust and the Friends of the Gresford Colliery Disaster Memorial. And the aims of our trust are to preserve, restore, maintain and record our mining heritage. When we think of the North Wales coalfield, for the thousands of people it employed, there are only one set of wheels still standing in North Wales at Bersham Colliery. Every colliery has been obliterated. Point of air, you would not know there had been a colliery. And it's so important, well, I feel, and some of my colleagues, that the children should know about their history and where they did originate from. My first involvement with mining, when I was a child living in colliery houses in Rosley, in Wrexham. Mining goes back at least 6 generations on both sides of my family. My mother was born and bred in a small mining village in Cumberland, whilst my father was born and bred in Trident. They were typical back-to-back coronation type houses. The pit was at the very back, which was Rosley Colliery. It was derelict when I was a child, but that was my playground. I managed to get my ventilation officer's papers at 20 years of age, which was very, well, I was the youngest in the country. I couldn't even sign the Mines and Quarries Act till I was 21 in them days, but the NCB did pay me the rate. Now, I'm here to talk to you today about the Gresford disaster of 1934. So I think just to start, we'll go back to the 9 o'clock news on the 22nd of September 1934. The whole of today's news is overshadowed and darkened by a terrible mine disaster in North Wales. There was an explosion followed by fire at Gresford Colliery near Wrexham early this morning. Of the men working in the mine at the time, more than 200 safely reached the surface. But for the rest, we deeply regret to say the position is extremely serious. 6 bodies were brought to the top within a few hours of the outbreak, and the Ministry of Mines has been informed that the number of men still trapped by fire in the pit is believed to be between 100 and 120. How could such a thing happen in 1934 with all the legislation laid out for safety? To find the answers, we have to go a little bit back in time to the beginning of the colliery. Now, many years have been spent in planning the colliery, and sinking began at Watstyke Field in Garden Village. But this proved abortive due to the same geological problems which had beset the sinking of Gresford Colliery in 1868. Henry Dennis, he was the driving force behind the company, which was to be known as the United Westminster and Wrexham Collieries Limited. Henry Dennis was chairman and managing director. Dennis died in June 1906. His son Henry Dyke Dennis succeeded him in that position. Following the aborted sinking in Watstyke Field, the company moved its operation down to Acton Grange, and the first sods of the new pit were cut on the 16th of November 1907. The shafts were 50 yards apart to a depth of 700 yards. At 200 yards there was a tunnel connecting the shafts, housing pumps to hold any water ingress from the surface. In 1934, 2,200 men were employed, of which 1,850 were below ground. By the way, if anybody's got any questions, please shout out. Going back in the pit was sunk between 1907 and 1911, and it wasn't a coincidence that it opened in 1911, because new legislation was coming out at that time that any mine that was mining coal prior to 1911 was exempt. So everything was pushed on and on and on to open that colliery in 1911, where the legislation stated that every face had to have 2 roads, one with an inlet airway and one with an outlet. But because it was done prior to 1911, this wasn't needed. This slide shows one of the railway carriages which we used to provide hospitality for the VIPs, dignitaries, mayors.
Thank you.
The gentleman there with the long hair was Sir Theodore Martin, one of the main contributors with money to the scheme.
Could I just interrupt there? You see the chimney on the side there? When Alan mentioned growing up in the Gresford Colliery houses, and you could see
That chimney in the
that
background.
is at the back of the houses.
What divided the two was the main Wrexham fault. There was a huge fault underground between Gresford Colliery and Gresford Colliery. This was when they were ready to take the first piece of turf out. I should think that would be Dyke Dennis's chair with the tarpaulin over it to keep it dry for him. Here they are, all ready to go. This lady there could be
Mrs. Dyke Dennis.
Mrs. Dyke Dennis, we believe. But, sorry. Theodore is there.
It's very distinctive having such a mop of hair, isn't it?
Thought it was Lloyd George.
But there was a special line that was run with the dignitaries' carriage on from Wrexham there just for them. As I stated earlier, the ground was very shaly, so they couldn't be bricked up, so they decided to drop steel rings down to stop the material ingressing into the shaft. And that's looking down at one of the quadrants where they were digging. They had 4 different sets of men digging in each quadrant. And they went down, I think it'd be about 120 yards, this is from memory, and then they went to the conventional bricking. 71 years on, the last of a coal coming up from Gresford. Now, what I'd like to carry on with now is a little bit of background to what was going on in 1934 in the whole country and Wrexham in general. Unemployment. In 1933, unemployment rose to 2.5 million. That was 25% of the workforce. Now, worse hit were the areas of heavy industry in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the north of England. The coal, the iron, the steel, and the shipbuilding. These industries had never been modified after the World War, and the other countries now were coming in with their goods, really hammering this country. Now, local collieries were closing. Now, again, a new legislation came out in 1934 that due to the surplus of coal, each mine had its own quota that they could bring up to the surface. The working of double shifts was banned, and rightly so, with 25% of the country unemployed. But that was totally ignored. People were working all sorts of shifts. The quota finished on a Saturday morning at 6 o'clock. So if for any reason the colliery was behind with its quota, they brought as many men in as they could on the Friday to obtain that quota. Working conditions. 1932, there were 907 fatal accidents in British coal mines. 907. A miner was 10 times more likely to be killed at work than a factory worker. And the miner also had a 1 in 7 chance of serious injury. Money was very sparse, but there was limited entertainment. How about 5 shillings and 9pence for a trip to Blackpool? You see what it is now?
30 pence.
30 pence and get to Blackpool for the day. Fast direct service. In Wrexham, carnival with prizes to the value of over £100. I think it equates to about £6,000 now. Yeah. So it was a big event. The band of the 4th Battalion, the Royal Welsh, were playing. Gresford Colliery Silver Prize Band, they were playing. All the colliery bands were there entering the competition. They were given the time off to go, but the condition was they worked the Friday night to make up for their shift. And on the Saturday morning of the disaster, there were only 3 or 4 of the band left. Yeah. We had the cinema, Lazy River, Master of Men. Bertram Mill Circus was in town that time as well. And an annual demonstration at the Drill Hall, Wrexham. And who was speaking? Sir Stafford Cripps, King's Council Member of Parliament.
Does anyone know who Stafford Cripps is?
I've heard it.
You've heard of
Have you heard
he,
of him?
he did represent the men at the inquiry. It just seems such a coincidence that
He was there at the...
he was there leading up to the disaster.
Robert Richards was a long-standing MP at Wrexham.
Oh yeah, yeah. What else was going on? Wrexham versus Tranmere Rovers. What a derby match that was, a big, important derby match. People were men were swapping ships so they could get to the match. There was so many, well, we don't know, we've estimated 50 or 60 at least swap ships and lost their lives. It was such a big occasion. Both sides unbeaten. And do you know what? The game went on the Saturday morning after the disaster, on the Saturday afternoon.
Can I just say, Wrexham, even today, the lonely place where it lies in the football tables, still has a good crowd,
Oh, yes.
even to this day. And if you notice, on that printout, it says that the kick-off is at 3:15. Now, do you know that the kick-off at 3:15 was for the miners? To enable them to go to the match?
Finish at 2 o'clock and go there.
Yeah. But there was no pretend baths then, obviously, so
no.
they had to try and clean up and
Yeah.
for the match, yeah.
I don't suppose they got the tin bath house.
September the 21st, the day before, 1934. Eddie Edwards. He was working in the Dennis section where the explosion occurred. Eddie was the last living underground worker pre-disaster. I had many chats with Eddie, very lucid. He died a couple of years ago, age 102. But very lucid, absolutely brilliant he was. His opinion was it was a shot firing. He said because people, they didn't care, the shot firing had to be done and away it went. They disrupted the ventilation to do the shot firing. And Eddie was adamant that was the cause. He said he was fortunate he was working the day shift, it could have been the night shift. Little Jackie Cartwright. He was, I spoke to Jackie on quite a few occasions. He was still at Gresford when I was working there. He was a guy who doubled up every Friday, worked 2 shifts illegally every Friday. And on the night of the disaster, he decided he'd go home. His workmate said, well, why are you going home, Jackie? Oh, he said, I'm just going home, I've had enough. And it wasn't a case of going, jumping in the car and driving home. It was a 4-mile cycle ride to get home with no street lights. But he had his snap in there, his water, but no, he said, I'm going home. And he had to knock his parents up to let him in the house. And they wanted to know why he'd come home and wasn't working. And he said, oh, they didn't want me. He made some excuse. But then the following day, they had to wake him up to tell him what had gone on.
Okay.
Albert Rowlands chats with Albert. Albert didn't work underground, he was working in the lamp room, only a young boy. And he was cycling to work that night with his dad. And his dad said, have you seen the time, Albert? You need to be there by now. Go ahead. So Albert shot off ahead to the lamp room to start getting the lamps ready. And his dad went to a different window for his lamp. He never seen his dad after that. Now, the colliery, it's difficult to explain. Can you imagine it as 2 little villages underground? One section totally away from the other. Now, in the Dennis section where the accident occurred, there were 268 men working there. Come to the side. The shafts are here. Yeah? This is the Dennis section. This down there was the slant. Now down the slant, 250 men. They were working on that night shift, so that's over 500 men working on the night shift of 1,850 underground workers. It was a huge amount. Now the manner of ventilation was, the blue is intake air. Going down the shaft, around. Now this area here was an older version of working, but these were cold faces. But the air would go round that cold face, and then return there. If the 1911 legislation had been invoked, each of them would have had a separate road to take the air to the return road. But the way it's done, the gas just gathered on its way into one piece. Now, this this is where it's suspected the explosion happened. 2 a.m. 22nd of September 1934. See that the area I just showed you, that was really being modified, electrical machinery. People were struggling to keep up with the machines. They were really struggling. They were firing shots left, right and centre to keep up. So as Eddie told me, rather than take men off the face to do the shot firing, they waited till they come off the face for the snapping. They did have a break at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I think that's it's a pretty picture, that, more than, because it's a true picture, that. But if I go back to the area, the guys working on the coal face were working in a pair of underpants and a pair of clogs. There were no helmets or anything like that, and the clogs were all drilled to let the sweat out of their boots. Something has happened down at Dennis. I think it has fired. That was somebody in the pit bottom cabin ringing the surface. He'd heard something. A chap working at the pit bottom, it came nearer like thunder. Then the place was all black. You couldn't see anything. Now the main slant, as I said, the main slant came away. It was like a separate village. There were 250 men working there, and one of them was John Edward Jones, Big Ike, my mentor. Ike was working on a coal cutting machine. He said the noise was tremendous off them, really tremendous. And you didn't stop them until they had to be stopped. You kept them going. And he had a tap on the shoulder, and he looked round and he was told to kill the machine. And he stopped it and he said, get to the surface. There's something happened in the Dennis section. He didn't know anything that had happened there, and working so close. Other people, there's stories, they were lying in bed in Wrexham and it blew them out of bed. The stories vary so much, but Ike, I say, he was that was his memories of it. You can see the shafts there again. Now in 29s, in that area there, John and Albert Samuels, they were working. They heard a thud. and they knew something had gone seriously wrong in 14th District, just above. Again, the air was going in, around the faces, across, down, and all coming out round there. So by the time it got to them guys, it was in a dreadful state. Now, they tried different old roadways to get out, and they failed. So they decided they would go up 99's road. Just to explain, the air coming in, them roadways were looked after because the coal had to come out of them. But the return airways were neglected because they were solely for air. It was so bad in some areas where they had to have compressed air blowing just to give a little bit of ventilation. And again, compressed air is the worst thing for static electric. So that's another possible cause. But what a trek. The area there that we're looking at, it is 2 foot square at the most. But they were having to climb over falls, up ladders, because I said on the returns it was just a necessity, you know, it was put up with. They wouldn't go a gradual slope, they put a ladder up and climb up the ladder. Now in the bottom right, the steel tubs, photographed after the colliery was reopened. Can you imagine the blast to lift steel tubs out of the air and chuck them into just a heap like that? Now, several hours to climb that little road, up along, across, and then a little roadway to the clutch. Now when they got there, they met Andrew Williams, the under manager. He was going in by to see what had happened. But on their way out, they encountered quite a lot of other survivors. But they refused to go with them. They said it was better to wait for help than to go. One of these was Di Jones. He thought he would wait, and another one, John Nichols. Now John went back to look for his brother Bill. And that family...
Could I just pop in there? I'm sorry, I interrupt you all the time. It's because I do a different talk on this. More of the personal touch about the people. But the Nichols family, they were a family of brothers, and one brother, Harry, was a widower and he got little girls. I think it was 3 or 4 children, all little girls. And they wanted to go to the fair. There was a fair on in Rose, I believe. And Harry asked his brother, the father of the little girls asked his brother Harry if he would change shifts so that he could take his children to the fair. Of course Harry agreed to do that. Harry didn't make it. Now then John Nichols, who Alan mentioned there, John, Di Jones was his friend, and he said, "Come on John, come with us." You know, and they went to safety, and John said, "No, I'm going back to look for our Bill." Another brother also died. 3 brothers. That poor mother lost 3 brothers, but how bad would the 4th brother have been knowing that he'd sent his brother to his death? But on the other hand, those little girls were already motherless. They would have been orphans, they wouldn't have had anybody. So perhaps it was meant.
I don't know if you believe in fate, but so many people change shifts for so many reasons. It's just the more we look at it, it's hard to believe. But the typical one of the roof falls they would have been climbing over, with nothing over their heads. The 6 survivors: Cyril Challoner, Bert Samuels, Tom Fisher, Di Jones, Jack Samuels and Teddy Andrews. They did everything wrong to get out. As a ventilation officer, I would not have gone the way they went, so I wouldn't have been. And you know, I'd have said to them, "Don't, you know, that's silly going that way," but they did it the wrong way and it worked for them.
Yeah.
But the air reversed, didn't
Yeah,
it?
the air usually reverses and then, well, it does reverse in an explosion. It goes looking for the oxygen, so instead of the air flowing that way, it pulls in and
It's went back.
takes it back. Now, men are arriving at the pit bottom from the slant area. They're desperate to do what they can to help their colleagues in the Dennis. Fires are raging. Another relative of mine, Ralph, who I spoke to many times, he said timbers were burning. It was like a circus act. So they were throwing everything, stone dust, fire extinguisher, whatever they could. Now, the first rescue team arrives, but they were from Llymain, and there was no maps of the Gresford Colliery area to give these guys. So one of the Gresford team members volunteered to go with them. Now, they were instructed by an official to enter a certain roadway and just check what the conditions were. Oh, I should say I was a member of Gresford Colliery rescue team as well. And what the official tells you, that is gospel. You don't do anything except what you're informed. But one of the rescue team had defective equipment, so they didn't take him. But that left 4 in the team. So the stretcher was pointless because 3 were never going to carry on if anything happened. But on entering the roadway, the canary dropped dead. Now, again, rules and regulations, even then with the canary, when the canary died, you had to go back for another canary. So they should have gone back then. Later on, when I just on the side, when I was on the rescue team, we did have a metal cage for the canary with the glass sides, and the handle was an oxygen bottle, so that if the canary started to wilt, we could close it and crack open the oxygen bottle and bring the canary round. So not because we loved them, it was because we didn't want to walk all the way back on
You know Jeff Charles.
Do you know Jeff Charles?
I knew him.
What a marvellous man. Now, Jeff at the time was a young reporter. He made his way to Gresford, accompanied by a friend who had just finished work at Brumbo Steelworks. So he was in his what we call his black. And when they arrived there, they were waved through, thinking that they were rescue workers. Now, Jeff had quite recently to the explosion, he'd been on a course on reporting on disasters, of all things. So he went straight to the lamp room to find out how many lamps were missing. Then he knew how many men were still underground. Now, he was told there was 250 lamps missing then. King George V was being told that fewer than 100 men were missing. Well, their efforts reached 102 men. Now, the other thing Jeff had to do was report on the Wrexham tramway again. And he didn't want to do it, but he had to go. And he was castigated when he got there for making up these ridiculous numbers. But he said, I've been there, I know the lamps and I know the numbers, but fellow reporters were saying you should not have done what you've done, but it was proved that Jeff, he was absolutely
Right.
right on,
Yeah.
on them numbers. Now the rescue work continues. Brave men trying to fight the fire. The rescue men doing their best. And all the relatives could do was wait. Just stand and wait for any information.
Can I tell you a little story? Alan and I were at a funeral on Monday of a marvellous old gentleman. He was 94 years of age. And his father died in the disaster. And Trevor Lloyd-Jones, his name, we recorded him just a few weeks ago, in time for the 85th anniversary of the disaster. And Trevor, at one point, was brought to tears. And his son was there with him, and he was talking, and he said he lived in the Roseley Colliery houses. You saw how close that was to the pit. He was told he mustn't go to the pit.
He was 9 years of age,
But he was
remember,
9
but
years of
told got to
age.
go.
His dad, who he thought the world of, was there. What was he going to do? He went to the pit. His dad used to give him a ride on the front of his bike, you know, as dads do. So he went to have a look if his dad's bike was still in the bike shed. And his dad's bike was the only one left. And while he is telling us this, at 94 years of age, he was brought to tears.
Yeah.
And it's such, I wish I could show you the film because it really is heartrending.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many stories we could tell.
Yeah.
There's so many stories.
That's how it stayed with them right up until 94.
94.
Yeah. I'd say the crowds there just waiting and
Yeah.
the truth was coming out now. Over 260 miners perish in the blazing pit. They fight against the flames and gas for 40 hours. The road kettles. 3 rescuers lose their lives. Graphic stories by survivors. And the decision had to be made what they would do to carry on. They could not, they failed to put the fires out. And as we all know, the only thing that feeds the fire is
It's the
oxygen.
wood, yeah. And there's plenty of wood down there, isn't there?
Yeah. So to stop the oxygen meant sealing the shafts. That is one of the shafts as it was, after it had been sealed, the concrete over the top. Again, that's the Dennis pit, the Dennis shaft, where they were sealing. And even then, there was more to come because an explosion blew the cap off one. One poor chap on that yard, it landed on a piece of concrete, landed on it. Make a total of...
Right. I tell my grandchildren this, you have to excuse me because my granddaughter was star of the class because she remembered what I told her. 261 men died in the initial explosion and the fires that followed. 3 rescue team members, who you haven't really mentioned, 3 rescue team members lost their lives. Only one of them came out of the 4. Okay, so that took us to 264. You're all good at maths, aren't you? A man died when the seal, part of the seal hit him afterwards on the Tuesday following. So that took us to 265. So why is there 266 names on the plaque? Everybody knows 266 men died in the Gresford disaster. Well, I can tell you the reason for that. The 266th person to die didn't die in the disaster. He didn't die in the immediate aftermath. He died maybe 3-4 weeks later. He was buried on the 18th of October, and thereby lies another story. He was buried on the 18th of October, but what had happened, he was working on the opposite, on the slant section of the pit. So if there's an accident, the first people who are on the scene, you don't sit back and wait for the rescue team members to get all the togs together and get to the pit, do you? The first people on the scene were the other colliers, the other miners, and he was one of the ones that had come up because his brother was in the Dennis. So he was there helping, and a few weeks later they had a memorial service, and at the memorial service he collapsed. He was taken to hospital and didn't recover. So it was decided that he died as a result of the disaster. So although he wasn't in the disaster, and he isn't amongst the numbers that are mentioned at the time, he died as a result, and his name is on the plaque. And would you believe his name is Frederick Strange? And it took me months and months to find out why his name was there. But yes, and it was so sad because his brother also died, Albert, but then at his funeral there was a bit of confusion and the minister didn't turn up and they had to get another minister, and it's another story. That's a story for again. Yeah.
Now, so we come to the inquiry, and I think even at this present time, what do inquiries bring up? More problems, more questions. They don't answer anything. These men could not bring out one statement. Each brought their own statement of facts out. Sir Stafford made a speech to the inquiry. He was cross-examining witnesses, but he made a speech. Now you might find me a little bit boring, but Sir Stafford made a speech that lasted 3 days, 4 days.
Well, you and I can do it.
In total 150,000 words. Now I haven't been through it because fortunately somebody did a brief one of it, but this goes to 60 pages. But some of the things he brought up, well, what he did, he questioned the truthfulness of the evidence given by the mine owners. Not the mine owners, because the mine owners didn't appear at the inquiry. They did not go to it. He questioned the mine manager's truthfulness, the mine officials, and even Her Majesty's Inspector of Mines. Now the management and the officials were kept on full pay after the disaster, and they went to school to learn how to address the inquiry when it came. They did manage to get miners to give their evidence. There's 11 witnesses, and everyone said he had a fear of victimisation. And I know, going back to the 60s, that there were people criticised for going to the inquiry. It carried on and on. Now, not one miner had ever been given a copy of the regulations of coal mining, which they should have been in accordance with the Act. it was a breach of the Act which gave the men no encouragement to interest themselves in safety regulations. Now, supervision was by the manager, under manager, a night overman and the fireman. The night overman, who supervised the whole pit on nights, had only visited the Dennis section of the pit 4 times in the 2 months prior to the explosion. He was responsible for that area and visited it 4 times. The manager himself, he'd been there on 4 occasions in 2 months. And them occasions were when there'd been a fatal or a very reportable accident. So he'd gone there when he had to go there. So Stafford read extracts from the manager's evidence showing that the firemen were responsible for output, which is they were there for safety. They were there to fire the shots, but their job should have been safety. Their records were either not kept, or they were destroyed or hidden away. As I said about the increase in use of mechanisation, increased the speed of turnover, so the shot firing took place when it shouldn't. As an official down the pit, my lamp I could relight underground, but great care had to be taken when doing it. In them days they had an official relighter, and it must have been a continuous job for him, because they put them down where there was gas and they'd be out and they'd be relighting them continually.
Excuse me, what does shot firing mean?
I do beg your pardon. I do.
I think it is.
It's where you drill the coal,
Yeah.
put the explosives in, then you've got your wire detonator in
in
there,
the back, yeah.
and then you've got your wire going away and you explode the coal.
Right, thank you.
If you can imagine a seam of coal 6 foot, the machinery then was undercutting the coal to about, perhaps 2 foot. Then the explosives then would break it all down into the right size lumps to put onto the belt. But
Thank you.
every time you do that, you should be checking for gas. And they just didn't do it. They didn't have the time to do it. Her Majesty's Inspector of Mines. Now, they came in for the drilling of the Stafford, and their formal visits were made to the mine, but the majority were only on the surface. They never went underground. Or if there had been a fatal or a reportable accident, they had to go down. And the ones I highlighted, the faces, the inspectors had never visited them. They'd kept well away for the purpose. Right, the inquiry opened on October the 25th, 1934, and highlighted management failures, lack of safety measures, bad working practices, and poor ventilation in the pit. The miners were represented at the inquiry by Stafford Cripps. Now, later in 1937, legal proceedings were started in Wrexham's Petty Sessions Court against the pit manager, the under manager, and United and Westminster Collieries Limited, the owners. Now, aside from the evidence of poor working practices, it was discovered that one man had been instructed to fake ventilation figures. And that was a fact. Now, the court dismissed most of the charges. The mine owners were not called to give evidence, but Mr. Monsell, the manager, they hammered him £150 fine for for not keeping accurate records, which worked out as 55p per miner. Another aside, the afternoon shift, the ones that went on afternoons collected their wages, put it in their pocket and took it down the pit with them. So them wages are still underground. So the families now had no money for another week till they got the week in hand. And when they were given the wages, 2 o'clock on the Friday morning, there was underlined, they stopped 4 hours pay because they were all there. I thought that was dreadful. But then, when I read about the Titanic, the time that the Titanic went down, whether the sailors were alive in boats or dead, that's when their wages stopped as well. It was a thing of the times. Dreadful. Okay, I think I've covered what I can. Any questions at all, please?
Yes.
Can you just show the pictures of the miners? That's the Stafford.
Oh, so Stafford, yeah, sorry about that.
On the next one.
Excuse me.
That's all the photos that we've been able to gather of the miners who died. There isn't photos for all of them because most of them, I think they only have the photos taken at a wedding or an event.
Yes,
And
yes.
the bandsmen had their
Yeah.
photos taken with the band uniforms on.
Yeah.
But if you look at the next picture again, it shows the colonel of the regiment informed His Majesty the King through his private secretary of the loss of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers sustained by this disaster. And it was 27 serving men and old comrades.
There was the territorials. But
Some
there's
of
quite a
them-
few old comrades had gone through the First World War
And died in
and
the
died at Gresford Colliery.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, even there, it shows we have Remembrance Sunday,
Yeah. But there was a lot.
but really, as well as the soldiers, we should think of the people who were on retained work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in the Denbighshire coalfield, I'm not counting Point of Ayr because I don't know the numbers, but in the Denbighshire coalfield, 53 miners died down the pit during the war. Not the ones who suffered accidents and were taken to hospital or whatever, but actually died down the pit during the war. And I think we should remember them.
Yeah. Dennis's, didn't they have a brickworks? Dennis is the
Oh, yeah.
Robin.
Sorry?
Are they the same family? Dennis.
The brick
Yeah,
works.
the brickworks.
Yes.
It is the.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
they had the fingers in a lot of
Right.
pies.
And just another point, the Gresford Colliery Disaster Memorial was how many years
It took 48 years to get
to
a
get the
memorial.
memorial done?
If you click on to the next picture, I think that will show the memorial. No, it isn't. That's the names on the plaque. 266 of them.
Yeah.
You said they closed the shaft in 1934, sealed them up. Now a lot of miners from Gresford came to Point of Ayr
Yeah.
1974,
Yeah.
so they must have opened the shafts up
No,
again.
no, we reopened Gresford. Gresford was reopened.
Or was it?
It was, again, the claim was by the management and the owners that they wanted to get them bodies out.
Yeah.
And again, Ralph Roberts, a relation of mine, was part of one of 30 men who were picked to reopen the colliery. No deep mine anywhere in the world had been reopened after sealing the shafts. Only Gresford, and none after, because of what they encountered. They got down, they were sorting out, and they got down to start going into the disaster area, and they were told that it was too dangerous. But the owners have got their pit up and running again, haven't they?
And the bodies are still there.
Closed in 1974, Gresford.
Yeah.
And most of the men were baffled to
A lot of them went to the point, yeah, they were called jackals. And
Jack.
Well, we called you seagulls over there.
Very good.
You know John Wiltshire,
Yeah, I know John, yeah.
I'll speak to John over there tonight. And Roger Squires,
Yeah, Roger, yeah, from Wrexham.
that's him. Sorry.
Sorry, Paul. Did the widows receive any compensation?
Oh yeah.
They did.
I think it's a point, we can almost do a talk on it where
Oh, is he?
the country
What was his,
felt so sorry for what had gone on. But again, money was short. But up in Grimsby, they were sending dried fish.
I know how they were.
They sent dried fish
Oh, yeah.
to the area. But it being the autumn, the orchards
And Kent.
in Kent, they were sending lorry loads of apples. One funny little story, well not funny, there was a children's home who sent a sack full of their cast-off clothes to Wrexham with a note saying, please, can we have the sacks back? So what the clothes were like, I really don't know. There's so many humorous stories, but there's on the other hand, a lady said she would like to take one of the young girls into her care to look after her. But she needed to be 14 years of age, blue eyes, blonde hair, of such a height, a religion had to be whatever, and she had to be willing to work in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Sorry, sir.
You know, you said that the manager, was it, that was fined £150? Okay, relatively speaking, what did you say, about 6,000 now?
Oh yeah, about 6,000, yeah.
But what the intriguing thing to me is, what was the maximum fine he could have been fined?
Well,
I mean, if the maximum fine was only 150, you can't blame the court.
yeah. But what the courts did, they did not even, they dismissed the charges before they went forward. And that was the minimum.
Right.
But so they did find them guilty of something, but it was the minimum amount. They didn't go, I mean, this day and age it would have been manslaughter.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully it would anyway.
It was
But
only,
do we learn? I mean,
it was only the manager who was fined, wasn't it?
yeah.
Nobody else.
But do we learn?
It's not the mine inspectors.
When you look to China,
Oh, yeah.
the number of miners that's dying there every week, and they're only the ones they tell us about. So,
My friend Dennis has a comment to make about the bodies of the casualties in Gresford.
Oh, I've been told I have a comment to make. Well, all I can tell you is those bodies are still there. When I was first sent down Gresford in the 1940s, we had to pass the boarded up tunnel, concreted tunnel, every day, knowing all the bodies were there. And I can tell you, it was not very pleasant for the first week or so. After that, we didn't bother. That's the truth.
Yeah.
I used to take an air sample from that stop. It was the last one was a brick one, but there was about 6 stoppings inside of that. I used to take an air sample every, I think it was bi-monthly from there, because there was nothing coming there. But after you left, the East Wing was within yards of the disaster area.
Yes, that's true.
I was told by an old miner that the only time that they were allowed to take their pit helmets off, I mean, bear in mind in those days they didn't even wear pit helmets, it was just a cloth cap. But later on, in the 80 years, it was the only time they were allowed to take their helmet off underground, was when they were stood by that wall. And they were allowed to bow their heads and pay their respects to the miners.
Jumping in, I assume you were a Bevan boy, sir?
I was, yeah.
Well done.
Something I've been curious about, we all seem to know about taking a canary down for the gas. Why a canary? Could not any little bird?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of secrets now. Shouldn't do, but there we go. Excuse me, of all the people who have a phone going. A canary breathes 50 times faster than we do. So obviously anything in the breath goes into the blood 50 times quicker. So that means that the canary reacts 50 times quicker to the gas. But I experimented at Gresford. the budgery gas.
Yes, I've seen
And they were far more efficient. Because I could have it on my shoulder and it would say, I can smell gas, I smell it.
I happened to be a head teacher in Treloggan, and a lot of miners were working in Point of Air. There was a gentleman who won the National Eisteddfod chair called Einion Evans, and he wrote a book, 3/4 collier, 3/4 a collier, and he came to the school to talk to the children, which was very, very important. And he mentioned the pit ponies, and I saw them there. Were the pit ponies down there when the explosion happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
There were names for every one of them.
There was,
They weren't,
when they got up those initial 7 bodies, it was that they got up first of all. And as they were going to seal the pit, they got out the 2 mines rescue team members, and as they were all leaving the mine and they're going to seal the pit, somebody stumbled across the body of a pit pony, and under the body of the pit pony was another miner.
yeah.
So that was another one that was, whose body was recovered. So
There's a piece in the report actually where they found one pony, they found a few dead men, some of them weren't burnt, but from the position of the body there was something they were frightened of.
they said they could see it coming.
They could see it coming,
Yeah.
and my opinion would be it would be a burning ball of gas. I encountered that at Gresford. It would just burn as a ball. But because the ventilation was okay, it had nowhere else to go. But if the gas was that bad, it could carry on. But the gas only starts the explosion. It's the coal dust that causes the bang. I don't know if anybody remember chucking slack on the fire.
Yes.
Come straight back again. And again, what they should have done was put stone dust on all the roadways. So the explosion lifted everything, but have a good mix of stone dust and kill it dead. But they didn't do that.
We were given this, you have to excuse us, we've only had it a matter of a couple of weeks,
not weeks of stage.
and both of us have read it from end to end. We couldn't put it down. It was better than any bedtime reading. It makes you so angry.
Yes.
I mean, I feel angry. I've never worked in a coal mine in my life. But I feel angry about the mine inspectors. I mean, they were supposed to check the management, they're supposed to check the records. The manager was supposed to check the fireman's records. The fireman didn't keep them. I just felt so angry having read this. It's
But as if going back then 30 years, what a fantastic job they did. They were that well thought. Have you heard of Steve Gorman? They used to make all the rescue equipment, the proto sets. After they'd reopened Gresford, Steve Gorman took the 30 of them to London and treated them like kings. He took them to all the shows, dined them out, because they'd done that work without one casualty. So I'm proud to say that I knew 3 of them. The men after, obviously, they're quite old, but not quite that old.
And can we also say that it was due to the Stafford Crepes that the coal industry was nationalised?
Yeah. From his report, when he reported back to Parliament, it was...
I mean, so it was nationalised 1946. But you know something? When nationalisation came, it came at a price, because all the records to do with the disaster had to be destroyed.
Oh yeah. That was, they said, yes, you can nationalise the pit, but any records we've got must be destroyed. And that's what happened.
When I look at this picture plaque on there, the last of the Gresford Fund.
Well, somebody said about the pension. I never answered that, did I really? No. it was a huge amount of money, and people now in Wrexham will still say that the money was frittered left, right and centre. And in the last 12 months we've got to find out that the money was very well employed. I was thinking there'd be so many children, so you would pay them X amount to bring the fund down. But there was other cases where children, they had problems, they were never going to work, and some of them were drawing on the fund in their 80s and 90s. But that was foreseen with the way that they did the fund. Like, funds like that come under a lot of criticism, but you really need to look deeply to see what comes out of them. I was saying about all the country really rallied. They were sending things left, right and centre. And it does give you faith in humanity when you read.
Yeah.
They didn't have money, but they could send the apples. The apples, when they came, the condition was that they could take coal back. They had to pay for the coal, but it saved the lorries running back empty. It was.
But, I mean, the fund, it didn't only pay for the widows and the children. On another slide, it tells you how many widows and children there were left. But the fund paid for the miners who lost their jobs.
Their tools.
They had no tools left. They had to buy their own tools. So the fund paid for their tools. It gave some of the pensioners, of which your tide was one, the men that were too old to get a job when the pit was reopened, or considered too old. Bear in mind there were 69-year-olds working down there when the disaster happened, but they had a small pension out of, I think it was 10 shillings every 3 months.
Something.
But they had a pension, and the children who, as Alan said, who were disabled in some way, they continued pretty much for the rest of their lives. They bought insurance indemnities to continue paying when the fund was running out. That was how they used the rest of the money. But that is where the very end of the money went.
Where is this plaque now?
It's on the Gresford Memorial.
At Gresford called the Gresford Roundabout.
Oh, on the Gresford Roundabout.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
So, the fund that was collected, did the mine owners not have to pay any pension or any compensation at all? It was all from public subscription.
Dreadful.
The owners paid nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I think actually they did give some money to the fund. About
why didn't they pay?
I think.
So I
wouldn't swear to it, but I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. But I mean, the fund went on. It was said that it would never run out. It was such a vast amount of money, but it did. There was one lady that I've recorded quite recently, Florence, and she wasn't old enough to know her father. She was only a toddler at the time of the disaster, but her brother was older than her. Now, her brother wasn't told by his mum. He absolutely idolised his dad, and he wasn't told about the disaster. So the first this little lad knew about it was when he went to Sunday school on the Sunday, the next day.
Yeah.
And he went to Sunday school, and the Sunday school teacher took him to the front of the class and said how very, very sorry he was to hear of this dreadful tragedy that had happened. And the poor boy was in pieces. He suffered epilepsy for the rest of his life. I believe, or Florence believed, that maybe the fund paid for him to have treatment. He saw a professor, and the professor said to his mother, "Has this young man ever had a shock? Because he's full of shock." And her mother said, "Well, yes, he has. He had a dreadful shock." And they think that was the source of the epilepsy.
No. How long was the survey done after? Was it 5 years? when they were looking after children? Was it 5 years after?
It was in 1949, I think.
Yeah, 49. They did a survey on all the children that had been paid out. And the ones that had got into apprenticeships, into the forces, and not one of them had been before a magistrate. So even though they suffered that as the family, something had taken them along the right road.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Ruby told me when they were in school, if anything was going wrong in school, they always got the blame.
If anything went missing, well, it's one of them kids, they haven't got any money or nothing. But Ruby was a fight, well, still is.
Yes.
She would stand her
She's a
ground.
feisty lady to this day.
I kept you quite a while, everybody. Is there anything else?
Yeah, you talk about men. How young was the youngest that died?
15.
I mean,
15.
wasn't a man, was it? But in any respect.
No.
15 he was.
Men and boys, we say.
Yeah.
I should say more often, men and boys, not men.
Yeah.
But you look at these, I mean, look at the name Roberts on there. How many Robertses are there? Look at how many Williamses there are. So many brothers.
Yeah.
You know, brothers and fathers. Yeah, yeah.
No, you say we were. I'm not going to fight my way through. Well, I stand in awe because you know, to go in the underground car park for me is something that I really don't like. So you know, I mean, we take for granted a lot of the people that do various jobs in the country, and I'm sure that coal miners is one of those that there aren't many of us in this room would want to sort of try and emulate. But we do thank you for coming along tonight and telling us all about the Gresford disaster. I'm sure that there are more questions that people would like to ask. We're not going to go away. For those that want to stay for a cup of tea, it will be available in the committee room over there in a few minutes. But before, and to give you time to make the tea, Hayden will do the raffle. And I'm sure you'll draw the tickets.
I certainly will. Thanks for the winner.
Yeah.